Hello and welcome. On today's episode, we are going to be talking about a campaign setting that I'm somewhat working on, I guess. I'm working on bits and pieces of it, and we'll see if it turns into something or not. Now, this campaign idea is specifically centered around D&D 5th edition. It would work for a Pathfinder. It would really work for any system, but the main crux of kind of where the inspiration came from was an issue that I found in 5th edition. And that issue simply was we don't get to play campaigns that go to 20th level. There are a lot of cool abilities and fun things that players can gain access to, and most campaigns end at like level 10, I think is the data on that. And so something in my brain as I've been playing in games, as I've been running games, and listening to other people who are running games, one of the things that I've always wanted to do is actually to, as a player, take a character from level 1 to level 20, and then just as a game master to, take a party from levels 1 to levels 20, right? And I know that there are a lot of complications that come with getting to those higher levels. So I wanted to see if there was a way that we could somewhat address those issues. And when I kind of ended up on basically the core concept is whenever you play a session, at the end of the session, the players level up. Okay, so that seems like probably really fast progression, which I can understand. I know some people play games for several years and aren't past level 10. But from that perspective of, hey, if we want to actually see a game go from level 1 to level 20, we need to inject and supercharge this progression because it can take several years if we're going by either XP leveling or even milestone leveling. But now that causes this weird narrative problem, and that is how do players go from, dealing with a goblin ambush in a small village to 20 sessions in and they're level 20 and they're able to kill the gods essentially, right? That's a huge power spike. So what narrative reason could we have where we could reasonably take a character from level 1 to level 20 in that span of time? And I've come up with this idea of the Gauntlet, and maybe I don't know if that's the final name or not, but it just kind of made sense to me. And I know the other like arena type situations have been called the Gauntlet before. It just feels right. Coincidentally, I think that this setup would also lend itself well to a West Marches type game as well. So you could have players drop in and drop out. We will get to that in a minute, but the core idea of the Gauntlet is to bridge the gap between the narrative or the mechanics of leveling up after every single session, and then the the narrative of like, why does that even make sense in this world, right? And it also kind of goes into the fact that I like to run one shots. I like contained sessions that are just jam packed with a lot of fun stuff to do. And so this that also kind of plays into just my style as a game master as well. And so the Gauntlet, essentially think of this as the Triwizard Cup, Hunger Games, Survivor maybe, in a way where this is a magical contest, like the magical Olympics. This is a society that has extremely powerful magic, and we're not even actually concerned about really the outside world. This entire campaign setting is focused on the gauntlet, these challenges that the players will go through. Maybe they'll survive, maybe they won't. Really kind of leaning into the Hunger Games aspect of it, where in the Hunger Games are this deadly competition of survival. They use a lot of technology that's magic like to us because it's just so advanced to create these massive arenas, and they can kind of control different effects that are happening on the field as it happens. And they're creating this big tournament essentially for entertainment, right? So the whole idea is all of this technology, all of this stuff is contained in this, area where they can then use it to sell as entertainment, and you can get sponsors and that sort of a thing that help the players out in those games. And so the same kind of idea is here, as that the Gauntlet is this magical competition, and who really knows about the people that are running this? We're assuming that these are like super high level mages. The world has lots and lots of magic and is either mostly at peace, or at least this part of the world is at peace, and like just everything, the culture, everything is focused around these games, these challenges, and entertainment for the audiences that are watching, and then the people that join, the players that enter into the Gauntlet and compete in these challenges, have the chance for fame, fortune, and power as they kind of get leveled up. So then moving on to the kind of the level up mechanic, right? You play a challenge, it's a contained one shot, and we'll get to one of the one shots that I've written here at the end already, so you can kind of get a feel for what something could be. So after you've completed a challenge, we're just going to artificially level you up. There's no experience points. The milestone is you survived the session, you level up. So part of the way that I would look at this is narratively, kind of like the Hunger Games. They have a lot of technology. They can virtually like create stuff and set stuff on fire and whatever. They've got this really weird, powerful technology. And in a magical tournament like this, right, where they want entertainment, they want all of this cool stuff to be happening, all these flashy abilities to keep that entertainment level high, they're gonna somewhat artificially level up the characters after each one. So if you survive, that is enough for them to say you advance to the next level. Boom. Whether or not it's your ability of actually getting better at what you do and leveling up, or if it's just the magic of them like enhancing the contestants every time they survive, you could really play it either way. But so there's this kind of level of magical artificialness or virtualness where like these games are, the people that are playing in these games are maybe enhanced, and you could almost look at this as like a virtual reality scenario as well. Imagine that the players in the games, they're not actually this powerful, they're just leveled up in a video game. They're virtually in this world where they can provide this entertainment, and the stuff can be broadcasted, and it's hyper realistic or whatever. But in like the real world, outside of the games, you're not superhumans, right? That's another way that you could play it. In a fantasy world, I would probably associate it more with just magical enhancement after the challenge is complete. But then that means that you're talking about the people who run this gauntlet, this challenge, this entire area are very, very strong magically. So that's just kind of an idea of where the society is at. And then we can kind of look at the like one shot structure and I guess the game loop. So the game loop is you run a challenge, so you run a one shot, you complete the one shot, hopefully you survive. Once you've completed that, you level up. And then at that point, you also can do some downtime activities between challenges. So this might be upgrading gear from various vendors. So buying and selling equipment, getting equipment enchanted, that sort of a thing. Meeting with and maybe doing some, social interactions with sponsors to try and get more sponsors and stuff. Maybe doing some training scenes to boost up some of your ability scores, making it really giving players an opportunity to say every time after you've completed a challenge, you get some downtime and you can spend it in a couple of different ways to train or to do whatever, right? And then that goes into kind of pumping you up for the next one shot. And then for the one shots, D&D is split into kind of tiers of play, roughly. So kind of the idea here is creating a series of one shots that could be played kind of at each tier level. So like tier 1, you might have 5 or 6 different one shots essentially that the players can choose from, or the DM can pick as well. And roughly those one shots will work for players between levels 1 and 5, right? Or 1 and 4. And there might be just a few mechanical tweaks in each one in the write-up of the one shot that says, like if it's a level 1 party, then, here's where you're going to set your difficulties at. If it's a level 4 party, you're going to bump things up in, this way to kind of just slightly adjust it. So we don't necessarily need to have a different one shot for every single level. We have a handful of one shots that can be played in a given tier. And then we have some levers we can pull to say, well, if this is a level 4 party, they're going to need to be challenged a little bit more than a level 1 party, for example. And then kind of a capstone to each of the tiers. So you do a number of one shots. And then once you get to the last level before you would switch over to the next tier, you have like a boss fight. So your boss fight is your kind of like I don't know, it's your big boss fight for advancing to the next tier. So it's just a more difficult one shot essentially before you flip over into the next tier, and then you start picking off more and more one shots. Now, going along with the Hunger Games concept and the fact that since we're not out adventuring and finding gear and finding loot and that sort of thing, we're in kind of a controlled environment. We need a way for the players to gain money, and we also need a way for them to, so that they can upgrade their gear and do all of that fun stuff. And we also want to have some social interactions with people, because a lot of these challenges are going to be focused more on problem solving, combat, and teamwork, and less so on the social aspect. So we want to make sure that we have that social pillar still involved. And that's going to lead me to sponsors. So like the Hunger Games, if you do things that sponsors like, then they give you money and they buy gear for you and they can upgrade your stuff. And that idea makes a lot of sense in this scenario, and it's going to be a way for us to kind of inject some cash into the player characters, since they otherwise wouldn't be getting it from mission to mission. And sponsors are going to play a bigger role in having gear, and we will get to that in a minute. Gear for sale, so like magic item shops, sort of a deal. So the first kind of core mechanic that I would like to do with sponsors is that every time you have a challenge, there's going to be a bunch of sponsors in the game that will have names, and I came up with a couple, so let me just read off a couple of sponsors. So we've got like Shadowblade Guild and Sunburst Armory, and there was one I really liked that was nature themed, Thornweave Technologies, and there was like Ironbark Armaments was one that I had come up with as well. And so these different sponsors will be geared towards different things. They might be geared towards weapons and armor. They might be geared towards magic items or enchanting gear and putting effects on them. Sponsors might be geared towards like single-use items or, specific types of magic. So like that Ironbark Armaments was going to be geared towards natural magic. One of the weapon ideas I came up with there was a Bramble Burst Bomb, which is basically a grenade that casts Entangle centered on the point of impact. So some fun things like that, and nature-based weapons and armor and all that fun stuff, right? And all these sponsors are going to have different things that they want players to do. So you'll have a list of sponsor goals almost. And basically the first player to achieve one of those goals in a challenge is going to get a sponsor point from them. So they're going to collect the point. And the idea is kind of at the beginning of the challenge, the DM either picks like 3 to 5 sponsors for the event, or would roll randomly on a table to say, here's the sponsors of, this week's challenge, and here's their goals, right? You lay it out for the players. And these goals that they're going to have are hopefully going to be things that are going to encourage certain types of play or role playing. So it will give kind of like mini side objectives or like ways for the players to try and be cool where they actually gain something from it, something additional from participating in the challenge, right? So let's say you have a company that's focused on armor and defensive stuff, they're gonna want to see like a really powerful blow deflected by some type of shield or armament, right? Like that's what they want to see contestants do. So if when a player does that, then they get the sponsor point for that round or that challenge, right? So there might be, 5 or 6 points available that can be given out to players, and then as players complete them, then they get those points, and those points will translate into cash or gold, I guess, at the end of the encounter. This might be variable by tier, so like however many sponsor points you get times 100 times whatever tier you're at, so that higher levels you're getting more payouts essentially without messing with any of the other math. And then you're going to have, like I said, specific goals for them to do, and these goals are hopefully going to be role play, encouraging fun and interesting role playing opportunities, right? To try to get players to do some of those funner things or do showy things, do some cool tricks, that sort of a thing. One of the other mechanics I wanted to put in here was brand loyalty. So if you have like 3 pieces of gear from one sponsor, one manufacturer, essentially, then you'll get a sponsor point at the end of the challenge. If you have more than 5 pieces of gear from one, you'll get 2 points. So just a way to like kind of encourage brand loyalty and just let them get some extra cash for playing and for kind of matching gear. And that also then leads to the idea that sponsors are kind of like manufacturers. If you've played the Borderlands series, where there's different manufacturers in Borderlands, there's manufacturers, they make different types of guns, and they all focus on kind of a specific style or aesthetic, and all their weapons are geared towards that thing, right? So, like, all Malawan weapons have some sort of elemental damage. Like, you can't find a non-elemental Malawan weapon, and the Jacob's weapons are all high damage, just ballistic weapons, right? And they play into these different things, right? So that's kind of the same idea, is that we would create lists of gear from the several of these different manufacturers. So you're not really going off of the standard gear tables that you have in Dungeons and Dragons. You've got these kind of slightly modified variations of gear. So one that I thought of, which is extremely, extremely simple concept, but is having a sponsor, one of the sponsors' weapons being specifically around durability and reliability. So they don't even have damage dice. You just deal, like 7 damage plus your strength mod or whatever, right? For a sword or whatever it is, right? So they would have slightly above average damage. You don't even roll dice, you just get flat damage because they like guaranteed not to dull, always a sharp sword, and just having different manufacturers that lean into kind of different things, right? Or like the Malawan example, this specific group, they only produce elemental weapons. All of their swords have fire, ice, or electricity on them. And, they have some different effects based on that, right? You've got an elemental based one, you've got nature based ones, reliability and durability, people who focus on putting enchantments on existing weapons, and having a whole system there. So some of that is just taking existing weapons and just kind of slightly tweaking them, changing how their damage dice work, giving them a slightly, different flavor or different effects, but then allowing players to kind of choose between all these fun different, gear options. Now, this being said, having multiple sponsors with multiple different gear options means that there's potentially a lot of work to do if I was to put this in a book. So I could easily see this being, if I continue to work on it and am inspired to do so, this could be I could see this being a Kickstarter for, this kind of a book. I could also see this being released in kind of chunks, both by releasing the one-shots kind of individually and then as a bundle as like the whole thing. And same thing with, I could even just put together basically the sponsorships, like magic weapons by so-and-so, Ironbark armaments, and here's just your huge gear list, right? And anybody who wants to just use that piece of it can go ahead. So one of the other things I forgot to mention with the sponsorship points was in the Hunger Games, sponsors can send supply drops to players. And the thought occurred to me that after you accrue a certain number of sponsor points, then you would unlock supply drops that you could then call in as a player and then get a little box magically flown into you that has like healing potions or something that fits, the need, your current needs, right? This wouldn't detract, like you wouldn't spend points to call these in, because then I think you would never spend them, because almost always going to be better to save your money or save your sponsorship points to have them be converted into gold and then upgrade your gear for the next round, probably, than it is to get these one-off bonuses. So I would say like every probably 3 sponsorship points that you just get a supply drop token that you can then use. And then maybe after 9 of these, you maybe get like a revive token or something. So if you do end up getting killed, you have a free, one up that you can cash in and keep your character around a little bit longer. Yeah, so that's kind of the core pieces here. And then let's take a look at one of the challenges that I've put together. And I have been trying to come up with challenges that are going to be interesting and not necessarily always focused on combat. Okay. So, because I think it would be very easy to overdo combat in this specific scenario. So, or this, you're doing these like gladiatorial combat, survival challenges and stuff. I don't want it to just always be combat, right? I want combat to be part of it, especially since a game like D&D or Pathfinder are focused on combat mechanics. But I also want there to be these other objectives, so it's not just a constant fighting. So the first one shot that I have come up with is called Owl Bear Egg Hunt. And I'm actually looking for players to play in, kind of do some play testing and play in this. And it's also something with the nature of these challenges, I can run these one shots multiple times for multiple people or for the same people or whatever. So if people are interested in kind of going through some of these one shots as I get them written and as we play test them, very open to that. So go and join the Discord server. We've got some threads there talking about the one shots, and let's try to get something scheduled. But Owlbear Egg Hunt, it's like rugby, except the ball is an egg and the opposing team is a pair of 1-ton monstrosities that are trying to kill you. So Owlbear Egg Hunt has some specific mechanics to this challenge for scoring. So this is a time limited encounter. So you're going to have, I don't know, between 15 and 20 rounds, I think. I'm not exactly sure on what the right number is just yet. That time limit is kind of based on the Orvold's Tower one shot for Index Card RPG, which is 15 rounds. So you have 15 rounds to escape the tower, and then you're done. Like if you don't get out, you're dead. Kind of the same thing here. We're going to do time limited. Again, it's a one shot. We want to keep things a little bit more contained. And the mechanics here are that you're trying to get this owlbear egg, and you're trying to score points by passing it to other players. So if you successfully pass it to another player, you score a point, and your goal is to score as many points as you possibly can in the allotted number of rounds, right? So very, very simple. And I have these written kind of from the perspective of 5th edition, though this would be very easy to run in Dungeon World, Pathfinder, Index Card RPG. I assume that the main target market for this is probably going to be 5th edition, so that's kind of where I'm leaning towards for now. But the special mechanics, we have the egg. The egg is the goal. Players aim to grab the egg and pass it. The egg can be thrown 30 feet. Okay? So easy enough. Pick a point within 30 feet. As an action, you can chuck it. You're good to go. Catching the egg. If the egg is moving without a character, such as being thrown or fumbled, and it passes through or within 5 feet of another character or creature, they can use a reaction to make a dexterity check and attempt to catch the egg. I don't have a specific difficulty on this yet. That may be one of those kind of things that we can tweak depending on what level the players are at. If the character fails to catch the egg, it will continue for another 15 feet in the same direction, or until it hits a solid surface. So you can chuck the egg to one of your players. If they catch it, you get a point. If they don't catch it, it keeps going and multiple people could attempt to catch it. So you may want to increase your odds, try to throw it in such a way that multiple characters can reach the egg. So if the first person misses it, it'll hopefully get to the next person and they can attempt to catch it. And if they fail to catch it, it just is going to keep going. I felt like that was probably one of the better ways. I didn't want players to have to make a dexterity check to throw the egg and then also have a dexterity check to catch the egg, because you're just probability wise having to succeed 2 checks in order for it to happen just really decreases your odds, sometimes in ways that you wouldn't necessarily expect. So that's why it's free to throw it. You can throw it wherever you want to, but it's the catch that is important, essentially, which is, I mean, kind of similar if you're thinking about football. Throwing it in the general direction is fairly straightforward. It's the person catching it is where you're going to run into a problem. Fumbling the egg. When a character holding the egg takes damage, they must succeed a Constitution save or fumble the egg. When fumbled, the egg moves 15 feet in a random direction opposite of the incoming damage. So if you think about a grid and you're standing in a grid and you're on the left and your owlbear friend is on the right of you, and they hit you and you take damage and you fail your save, the egg is going to go the opposite direction that the damage came from. So it's not going to go towards the owlbear, it's going to go away from the owlbear, so it's going to go to your left if we're kind of just looking at this as like a sheet of paper. And then a random direction, basically, since we're doing a square grid, or we're kind of envisioning that, you would have, it can go to the square immediately to the left of you, or it can go 1 square up or 1 square down, and it'll travel in a straight line. So you just roll a dice like a d6, and 1 and 2, it goes kind of up away from you. 3 and 4, it goes straight horizontal from you, and then 5 and 6, it goes kind of vertically down to the left. Not diagonal down to the left from you. So just a simple kind of randomizer there, so the egg's going to kind of bounce around in unpredictable ways. Again, if it goes past another player or another owlbear, they can attempt to catch it. So you got to be careful there. Now, I did put a map together for this scenario. It is a round arena map, essentially, and in the center of the map is the nest where the egg will start, and the owlbears will start around that. And there's a few different terrain options that are here. The first one is tangleweed. So this is a semi-sentient vine hazard that I created. It's difficult terrain. If a creature starts their turn in tangleweed, it will attempt to restrain them, and then you need to make a strength save to break out of it. Or maybe it acts like the web spell where you can like deal damage to it to get out of it. You can't necessarily kill the vines. There's just a lot of vines, but you can kind of break out of them for a second. So you don't want to start your turn in tangleweed. That's not a good idea. There's also a river. The river makes a complete circle, or a complete loop inside of this arena. And if you start your turn in the river, you move 15 feet along the direction of the current. So this is a hazard where it's both going to kind of stop you from, it's going to limit where you can kind of go. You're going to have to try to jump over it or find a way to climb over it or something. On the map, there's a few downed logs that you could use to run across it. And this one's not going to restrain you, but it is going to move you around the map if you fall in it, or if the egg falls in it, for example. And then there's some rocky outcroppings. So these are climbable rocks, again, difficult terrain. If you're on the rocks and you get knocked off of them, you take 1d6 fall damage. So it's another way for you to be able to kind of maneuver around the map by kind of jumping from rock to rock, but you got to be careful. The rocks aren't going to try to hurt you or do anything to you, but if you do fall off of them, you are going to take damage. So there's a little bit of risk there as well. And then for the owlbears, this is going to be a custom owlbear stat block. It'll have the same stats as a regular 5th edition owlbear, but instead of its normal attacks that it has, it's going to have some different abilities that allows the owlbears to move players around. So I left, one of the attacks, just Fury, Owlbear makes 2 swipe attacks dealing moderate damage. So 1d10 plus 5 was, I think, what the monster manual said. Then it has a slam attack, so it deals high damage, and then on a failed strength save, the target is pushed 10 feet backwards. So this is one of the abilities that the owlbears are going to use to knock players around into hazards. So I don't anticipate that players are going to willingly move through hazards unless they are positive that they can get through the hazards. The owlbear's just going to knock you in. They're going to slam you into the river, they're going to knock you into the vines because they're trying to get to their egg, right? Their tactics are not going to be to kill the players, but they will take opportunities to knock players into hazards to slow them down. And then we have Ferocious Roar. So this is a bonus action. It might be a recharge ability as well. All players within 15 feet must succeed a charisma save or stumble backwards 5 feet. So this is another one of those things that it can do to try and displace characters and move them around the field and hopefully knock them into hazards. So the Protective Owlbear, the stat block is geared towards working with the environment to knock players around, put them in hazards, and slow them down from scoring points. And that map, you can actually find the map on the Discord server. I did post it, so you can go ahead and go look at it if you would like. I will at some point be publishing this one-shot, so everything will be typed up nicely somewhere for you to get, probably geared towards 5th edition, like I said. Things to note here. So again, I mentioned at the beginning that I didn't want this one-shot to become combat-oriented, and it is combat because you've got these owlbears that are moving around, but it's not necessarily the optimal path to completing this challenge is not to kill the owlbears, because if you're using your actions to attack the owlbears, you're not using your action to pass the egg and score points, right? If you're not in a position to catch the egg or to score a point, sure, attacking them maybe makes sense, but what you're probably more likely going to want to do is apply effects or knock the owlbears around into some of these other hazards as well to slow them down from getting to the egg so that you can use your action to score points. So that's where that passing mechanic comes in. Like I said, it's kind of a weird, it's like a half combat in that you've got stuff going on, you have the option to attack, but attacking probably is not the most optimal way. Killing the owlbears won't make you score more points unless you can knock them out immediately, but there's going to be 2 of them running around, so you're better off slowing them down, try to stun them or something, and then score as many points as possible. So if anyone is interested in doing some play testing with me, feel free to jump over to the Discord server and let me know. We'll get something scheduled. If you're hearing this episode like a month after it came out, just still go over to the Discord server if you're interested. One other thing I would almost like to do with this is to create a leaderboard. So every time I run this session, I would like to basically get a name of the team that's playing and then keep track of their scores, and we can kind of have a competing, leaderboard to say, oh, this so-and-so team, is the current leaders with, 15 points or whatever it is. So that's just an idea there. I like the idea of being able to rerun one-shots after they've been set up, and I think this one would be a pretty fun one-shot and encounter. There's a lot going on. I think there's some interesting challenges to overcome. So that is pretty much it for the Gauntlet, which is a level 1 to level 20 campaign setting based on the idea of, the Hunger Games, Survivor, Triwizard Tournament, where players are leveling up at the end of every challenge. They're doing things to impress sponsors so that they can upgrade their gear and find cool, unique stuff made by these different manufacturers, and then playing in all of these fun, fantastical, Olympic level magical games. So if that interests you, or if you have ideas for one-shots, if you have ideas for gear or manufacturers or the like, please let me know in the comments. Come over to the Discord server if you want to play some games. Jump over to the server and we'll get some one-shots going. So thank you all for listening, and I will catch you guys next time.